The dust swirled in lazy circles across the dirt road as Margaret Hayes stepped down from the postal wagon, her worn leather suitcase heavy in her hand. The driver didn't offer to help, hadn't said more than 3 words to her the entire journey from town. She watched the wagon disappear back toward civilization, leaving her alone in front of a weathered ranch house that looked like it had been fighting the wind for decades. She was 42 years old, widowed for 8 months, and completely out of options. The Women's Charity Committee had made that abundantly clear when they'd presented her with this opportunity. Mrs. Pemberton, the committee president, had smiled that tight smile of hers and explained that Mr. Callahan, a rancher up in the Northern Territory, needed a housekeeper. Someone to cook and clean. The pay wasn't much, but it included room and board, and given Margaret's circumstances, well, beggars couldn't be choosers, could they? What Mrs. Pemberton hadn't said, but what her eyes had communicated perfectly, was that a woman of Margaret's size and age shouldn't expect better. The charity had done its Christian duty finding her any position at all. Margaret had bitten her tongue, accepted the papers, and packed what little she owned. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The ranch house door opened before she could knock, and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall, probably in his early 50s, with silver threading through dark hair and lines carved deep around his eyes from squinting into too many sunrises. He didn't smile, just studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Mrs. Hayes. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it often. Yes. Mr. Callahan, I presume. He nodded once, sharp. You can put your bag inside. Kitchen's through there. I expect 3 meals a day, house kept clean, laundry done on Wednesdays. He paused, still watching her with those careful eyes. You look tired. There's coffee on the stove. We'll start proper tomorrow. It wasn't kindness exactly, but it wasn't cruelty either. Margaret had learned to recognize the difference. The first week passed in a blur of work. The house was larger than it looked from outside, sprawling and dusty, filled with the accumulated neglect of a man living alone too long. Margaret scrubbed floors, beat rugs, washed windows that hadn't seen a cloth in years. She cooked hearty meals, pot roasts and stews and fresh bread, and left them on the table at the appointed times. Mr. Callahan rarely spoke. He came in for meals, ate in silence, and disappeared back outside to work with his pigs and handful of cattle. Sometimes she'd see him from the kitchen window, leaning against a fence rail, staring out at nothing in particular with that same unreadable expression. She learned his rhythms. Coffee before dawn, strong and black. Breakfast at 6. Lunch at noon, dinner at 6 in the evening. He liked his eggs scrambled, not fried. He took 2 sugars in his afternoon coffee, though he'd never asked her to bring it out to him. She'd simply started doing it after the 3rd day, and he'd accepted it with a quiet nod. The women from the charity committee had made it sound like she was being sent to slop pigs and scrub floors for a man who'd barely noticed she existed. They'd emphasized that this was temporary, that she shouldn't get comfortable, that as soon as something more suitable came along in town, they'd send for her. The subtext was clear. She was disposable, unwanted, shipped away because she didn't fit into their neat social order anymore. Fat widow with no money and no family. Best put her somewhere she wouldn't be seen. But on Sunday of the 2nd week, something shifted. Margaret had prepared a roast chicken with herbs from the struggling garden she'd started reviving. She'd set the table with actual napkins she'd hemmed from old fabric she'd found in a trunk. It was habit more than anything. She'd always believed in sitting down to a proper Sunday dinner. Mr. Callahan came in, washed up at the basin, and stopped short when he saw the table. This is... He cleared his throat. You didn't have to do all this. It's Sunday, Margaret said simply, carrying the chicken to the table. My grandmother always said Sunday dinner should be special. For the first time since she'd arrived, something in his expression cracked. Not quite a smile, but close. Mine said the same thing. They ate in less silence than usual. He asked about her grandmother, and she told him about the small farm in Pennsylvania where she'd grown up. He mentioned that his mother had come from the East, had never quite adjusted to the harsh territory out here. His father had worked himself into an early grave trying to make the ranch profitable. Why pigs? Margaret asked, surprising herself with her own boldness. He considered the question seriously. Cattle need more land, more resources. Pigs are smarter than people give them credit for. Efficient. Honest, in their way. He paused. They don't judge. Something in those last words made Margaret's chest tighten. She understood exactly what he meant. After that, conversations came easier. Not daily, and never forced, but real when they happened. He asked her opinion on things, whether he should repair the barn roof before winter or reinforce the pig enclosures first. She asked him about the land, the seasons, what to expect as autumn approached. She discovered he read. There were books hidden throughout the house, tucked on shelves and stacked beside his bed. Poetry, mostly, and history. She found him one evening reading Whitman by lamplight, his weathered hands gentle with the pages. "I didn't take you for a poetry man," she said from the doorway. He looked up, caught. "My mother's books." Seemed ashamed to let them sit unread. Margaret thought of her own books, sold off with everything else to pay debts after Harold died. "Would you mind if I borrowed one sometime?" He handed her the Whitman immediately. "Keep it as long as you like." 6 weeks in, a letter arrived from Mrs. Pemberton. A position had opened at the dry goods store in town. Counterwork, room above the shop. They expected Margaret back by week's end. She read the letter 3 times, standing in the kitchen that now smelled of the bread she baked every Tuesday and Thursday. Through the window, she could see Mr. Callahan mending a fence, his movements efficient and practiced. She should have been relieved. Town meant civilization, other people, a proper wage. It meant not being stuck out here in the middle of nowhere with a silent man and his pigs. Instead, she felt something very close to grief. At dinner, she placed the letter beside his plate without comment. He read it slowly, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "When do you leave?" His voice was carefully neutral. "They expect me Friday." He nodded, set down the letter, and didn't touch his food. After a long moment, he spoke again, quieter this time. "The house has never been cleaner. The meals have been." He struggled for words. "I'd forgotten what it was like to sit down to a real dinner." "Thank you," Margaret said softly. "That's not." He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not good at this. Talking. Saying what I mean." He paced to the window, his back to her. "They sent you here because they didn't know what else to do with you. I know that. I heard the way the committee talked about needing someone for the Callahan situation. Like I was a problem to be solved." Margaret's face burned. She'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed still stung. He turned to face her. "But you're not what they described. You're not some burden they were disposing of. You're—" He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "You've made this place feel like a home again. You hum when you work. You fixed my mother's rocking chair without being asked. You bring me coffee and don't make me feel like a charity case for accepting it." Her throat felt tight. "Mr. Callahan." "James," he interrupted. "My name is James." "James," she repeated, and his name felt significant in her mouth. "I don't know what you're asking." He crossed back to the table, his eyes finally meeting hers fully. "Stay. Not as temporary help from the charity committee. Stay as," he faltered. "I'm not a romantic man, Mrs. Hayes. I don't have flowery words. But I'm asking you to stay. If you want to. If this place, if that would be something you'd want." Margaret looked at this man who read poetry by lamplight, who treated his pigs with respect, who'd never once made her feel ashamed of her size or her circumstances, who'd been lonely in his own way, shipped to the margins just like her. "The committee will be displeased," she said. "Let them be displeased. Mrs. Pemberton will have opinions. Mrs. Pemberton can keep her opinions in town where they belong." A smile tugged at Margaret's lips, the first real smile in longer than she could remember. "My name is Margaret." His shoulders relaxed incrementally. "Margaret." He said it like he was testing how it felt. "Is that a yes?" She thought of the dry goods store, the room above the shop, the pitying looks she'd endure in town. She thought of this house that had become familiar, the rhythm she'd learned, the quiet companionship that had grown between them like something sturdy and real. "I'll need to write to Mrs. Pemberton," Margaret said. James almost smiled. "I'll post it Monday." They finished dinner in comfortable silence, but something had shifted in the space between them. Not love, not yet. They were both too practical, too weathered for fairy tales. But possibility. The promise of something being built between two people who'd been told they didn't fit, who'd found in each other's company a surprising sense of belonging. After the dishes were washed, Margaret sat in the rocking chair she'd repaired, and James read Whitman aloud while the lamp burned low. Outside, the wind swept across the plains, but inside, the lonely rancher and the widow they'd tried to cast aside began writing their own story. One neither of them had expected, but both were ready to claim. The charity committee could send their letters and their opinions. Margaret and James had found something more valuable than approval. They'd found home in the place the world had tried to make their exile.